Sampling. The overall training goal will be to understand the sample group process and to be able to apply it to practical situations. So now let's talk about what sampling is and how you can utilize it in your testing and verifications. So the standard testing process requires the rater to field verify and diagnostically test 100% of the homes. So not only is the installing contractor going out and performing their testing for the CF2R on every single home, the HERS rater also follows behind them and does the same test to verify the results so they can complete the CF3R on that home. So every home gets tested twice, once by the installing contractor and once by the HERS rater. So sampling is a process by which a HERS rater randomly selects one dwelling unit from a group of up to 7 dwelling units. They will then test that unit, and if it passes, then that whole group of up to 7 dwelling units is considered to pass. So now you are testing at a 1:7 ratio instead of a 1:1 ratio. So the assumption is that if one dwelling unit passes, the other one should be built to the same standards and should also pass. Because remember, the installing contractor is testing 100% of the homes. So they've already tested them and documented that they passed the test. So if you just randomly pick one of those and you test it and it passes, then that should be a good indicator that the rest of the homes in that group are in a passing state as well. Now, if the dwelling units cannot meet the sampling requirements, then the HERS rater will have to test 100% of the dwelling units in the sample group. Now, there are some tests that do not allow for sampling. For example, on the duct leakage, if you have to use, it's an altered system, and you have to use the smoke test method, that house or that system would not be eligible for sampling. So there's a couple of those, and you can review. We've covered that in the various training modules, those items that cannot utilize sampling to verify it. So let's start by looking at new construction. So there's a different process and different rules for new construction versus additions and alterations. So on the new construction side, it's generally going to be done in a subdivision, and you'll understand why once we go through the rules that are associated with that. And so this is for those production builders where they have a lot of homes being built within the same subdivision, and it makes sense to do the sampling process. So for new construction, there is a requirement for either what they call model or plan testing. So you first have to test all of the individual or unique models or plans, and in order for it to be considered the same model or plan, it has to have the same basic layout or floor plan, the same energy design, and the same compliance features. So generally, when a homeowner builds a subdivision, at the beginning of the project, they're going to identify anywhere from, say, 3 to 6 plans, I would say would be the average. And these are the model homes. So you go and you walk through the model home to see if you like what they're doing, and you can pick from those to buy within that subdivision. And so they build those same homes just over and over and over again with minor changes to either the layout or the floor plan, or exterior colors are going to be different and roof layouts are going to be different, but it's essentially the same model or plan. So you're going to have to test the first time that plan or model is built. You have to test it, and then once you've done that, any future homes that are built that utilize that same design can then be included into these sample groups. Now, the reason for this model testing is it will allow the builder to identify and correct any potential construction flaws or practices in the build out of each model or plan. So oftentimes they will have the Title 24 done, they'll do the performance modeling, they'll take certain HERS credits, they'll get out there, they'll build it, and then for one reason or another, something doesn't quite go right to plan and they have to make changes on site. And so when you do your testing, you're able to identify whether or not some of these HERS measures are going to work or are going to pass. If they fail, then the builder can make the corrections on this single home instead of having 20 or 30 homes that are already built before you come out to do your testing. And then you find that there's this issue that they now have to correct on a whole lot of homes. So this just allows you to get everything correct and working right, so that when you go into the actual production, things should run fairly smoothly. So the HERS rater would be able to utilize this sampling process when all dwelling units in the group are built within the same subdivision. All dwelling units in the group have the same installing subcontractor for that particular HERS measure. Obviously, you're going to have a different contractor for the HVAC system versus the plumbing system versus the insulation. So you're going to have different contractors, but it has to be the same installing contractor for that particular tested measure. And then all dwelling units in the group have the same associated HERS measures. So you're going to have any homes that are in that group, if you have blower door, duct leakage, and airflow, any other homes that you want to group with that have to have blower door, duct leakage, and airflow. If you have one plan that has blower door, duct leakage, airflow, and refrigerant charge, those would have to be separated out into their own sample groups and could not be included with the other. So you have to have the same associated HERS measures. Now, dwelling units with CFI systems, which are central fan integrated systems, shall be grouped separately from dwelling units without CFI systems. So they consider this a HERS measure, even though it really isn't. They're doing this just so that you don't avoid testing these dwellings with CFI systems, so that you have to have groups where you're testing all of them and they're grouped together, so that they are tested and not avoided. So when deciding on how we're going to assemble our different groups, our sampling groups, we have two options to choose from when we're dealing with new construction. So we have what's either called an open sample group or a closed sample group. So let's take a look at the open sample group first here. So the sampling rate for an open group is 1 in 5. So you have to test one dwelling unit in the group, and that group can have up to 5 dwelling units. Whether it's open or closed, you can always have less than the maximum number, but they're always going to provide you with that maximum number. So an open group can have no more than 5 dwelling units in it, and you have to test at least one of those. Now, what you have to have before you can do testing is the CF1R has to be completed and signed, and the CF2R has to be completed and signed for that dwelling unit that is to be tested. Now this group is going to be closed 180 days after the first CF2R is submitted, and that's going by the signature date on that CF2R. So the CF2R that's signed first is what's going to start that clock. Now the reason for this open group is oftentimes when we're dealing with a production builder and they're building in phases, you're not always going to have 7 dwellings ready at any given point or ready at a time. Like we'll see on the closed group, we can have up to 7 dwelling units. So this open groups allows a little more flexibility. So if you have, say we'll have phases of 3 homes. So the builder builds 3 homes, and then as those get sold, they start construction on another 3 homes, and then they start construction on another 3 homes. And so there's only ever 3 homes ready at a time. So this open sampling method allows you to maximize your sampling, but restricts you to these smaller groups. So you don't have to have 7 homes all ready to go at the same time. You can have 3 homes, and then you can take 2 homes from the next group and just put them together, even though they haven't been built yet, and just gives you some of that flexibility. On the closed side, we can have up to 7 dwelling units, but all of the CF1Rs and CF2Rs for the dwelling units in that group have to be complete. So you have to have 7 homes all complete at the same time in order to use this closed sample group of up to 7. Again, you can do less than 7, but we're trying to maximize to save cost for both the installing contractor and the builder. So you can, when you do this, it's not going to cost you as much money, so you can give a better price to that builder. So that's the big difference between your closed and open group. Is the closed group, you need to have all CF1Rs and CF2Rs complete for the dwelling units in that sample group, where on the open group, you only need the CF1Rs and CF2Rs for those dwelling units that are ready to be tested at that time. You can add additional units, dwelling units into that sample group up to 180 days after that first CF2R was signed, up to a maximum of 5 dwelling units. So it gives you a little bit of flexibility there. Now for closed groups, you cannot add any additional. You can't start off with 5 homes where you have all of the CF1Rs and CF2Rs and then do your test and then add additional dwelling units to that group. This group will be closed as soon as the HERS inspections begins, which means you cannot add or remove any dwelling units from that group once you've started your inspections. Now, one of the requirements for using sampling is that you have to have that same installing subcontractor for that particular measure. Now, occasionally subcontractors are going to change, so if that does happen, the builder must notify you as the HERS rater, and all sampling of the features the former subcontractor was responsible for must be closed. So you have to essentially stop creating sample groups. Only those that are utilized that subcontractor is responsible for can be included into groups. So you finish making those groups, you complete your testing, you close out those sample groups, and then you will have to then start all over again with the new contractor. So any remaining dwelling units that are left in the project under the new subcontractor will need to be included into their own individual sample groups so that you're not mixing and matching contractors. You don't need to do model testing all over again because that's already been proven out. You just need to make sure that you're not mixing lots from one contractor with another into the same sample group. And the registry is pretty smart about this. They're watching all that. If you try to do that, it's going to throw up a little flag letting you know that there's different contractors for that measure and you can't put it into the same sample group. But just so you know ahead of time that you'll need to manage those sample groups appropriately.
So here's the general steps to basically calculate the number of homes that you would have to test for a project when you're using sampling. These are the general steps. We'll talk about a couple of examples after this slide. And then in addition to that, there's a practical exercise to help you practice this process that's actually separate from the PowerPoint, and it's available to you in the learning management system. So these are the general calculation steps. So first of all, you want to subtract the number of individually tested model and plans from the total number of homes. That's because you want to test those models separately, and those are not part of your sampling. You want to divide the remaining number of homes by the sampling group size, whether it's 5 or 7, whether it's open or closed. So that's going to divide them up in the sampling group size that you want. To the result of step 2, add the number of individually tested models plan you originally subtracted in step 1. So after you figure out how many tested homes you're going to test based on the sampling group size that you're going to use, you're going to add back in the number of lots that you subtracted for the models, because you got to test those individually. And then after that, you round up. So if during step 2 you came up with a decimal, you always round up. You always round up. You're never going to test, half a house, and so you always want to round up in your final result. So the resulting number will be the total number of homes you will need to test in order to certify the whole project. So that's a way for you to calculate, obviously, in the long run, how many homes will you need to test in that particular project for it to be 100% compliant. So this is our first example, single-family construction, and those are the variables. So all the homes in the project have the same HERS measures. There's 40 total homes in the project. There's 4 unique model and plans, and you're going to be using the open sampling method. Now, because all the homes have the same HERS measures, we'll be able to group all the homes together. So first step, subtract the individually 4 tested model and plans from the total amount of 40. So 40 minus 4 equals 36, because you're going to be testing those 4 models individually. Now you're going to be dividing the remaining 36 by 5 because we're using the open sampling method. So because of that, you can only sample up to 4 homes, making it a group of 5. you're going to divide the 36 by groups of 5 because that's going to be the sampling method that you want to use. So 36 divided by 5 equals 7.2. Now add to our result from step 2, 7.2. The number of models was 4. So if you add the original 4 to the 7.2 that you calculated in step 2, that's going to give you 11.1. And because we said we want to round up, that 11.1 becomes 12. In order to certify the whole project, we'll need to test 12 homes in total in that project using the open sampling method and assuming there are 4 models or unique models and plans in the project.
Now this is a different example. Just like before, it's still single family, but in this particular example, the plans have different HERS measures associated within those particular plans, so they cannot be grouped together. So they have different models, plans, like I said, different combination of HERS measures. Plan 1 has 20 units in the project, Plan 2 has 10 units, Plan 3 has 17 units, and we're using the closed sampling method. And like I said, because they have different HERS measures, we'll have to group each plan type separately. So the first step is subtract one lot as the individually tested model plan from each plan type. So you're going to remove one plan for plan 1, 2, and 3, which takes down the number to 19, 9, and 16. Then you're going to divide each number, each plan number by 7 because we're using the closed sampling method. So 19 divided by 7 equals 2.7. 9 divided by 7 equals 1.2. And then 16 divided by 7 equals 2.2. Now in step 3, we're going to add each result from step 2, the one model plan we originally subtracted from step 1. So 2.7 for plan 1 becomes 3.7, 1.2 from plan 2 becomes 2.2, and 2.2 for plan 3 becomes 3.2. And then all we do is round up. So for plan 1, we're going to have 4 lots. For plan 2, we're going to have 3 lots. And for plan 3, we're going to have 4 lots. You add those numbers together, that's going to give you 11. So in order to certify the whole project, we'll need to test 11 homes in total in that particular project.
So far we've been talking about just single family construction, so individual homes built within a subdivision. But sampling is available for multifamily projects as well. So the rules for multifamily sampling are the same as single family. We're just going to define what is a dwelling unit within the multifamily structure. So on the single family side, one house or one home is one dwelling unit, and for your sampling, it's either 5 or 7 is your maximum number of homes or dwelling units that can be put into those sample groups. So when you're looking at multifamily buildings, each multifamily building is made up of multiple dwelling units, and they're all just attached, but each one is individual. You're not going to have one family that lives in 2 different units within that multifamily building or dwelling units. They're each going to be individual, and they each have their individual address. So each dwelling unit within the multifamily building will be tested and or sampled as if it were a single family home, and this includes the model testing. So when they design these buildings, the dwelling units within the building, they have these different floor plans or models, and so you're going to test each of those individually initially to make sure that everything works fine, and then from there you're going to move forward with your sample group testing.
So for our first example, all dwelling units will have the same HERS measures. This means that we will be able to group all the buildings together. Dwelling units from one building can be grouped with dwelling units from a separate building. So we are going to have 7 buildings total in the project. There will be 2 models within those buildings. So each building only has 2 different plan types. There will be 10 dwelling units per building. And we will be using the open sampling method. Now, as I mentioned earlier, for the multifamily, everything's done as a dwelling unit, not as a building as a whole. So first we need to take our total count and subtract for the models that we will be testing. So we have a total of 70, 7 buildings, 10 units per building. So we subtract 2 for our model tests, and that will leave us with 68. Now, because we are using the open sampling method, we'll need to divide 68 by 5, and that'll leave us with 13.6. We now need to add back in the 2 dwelling units that we used for our model test, and so we'll add that to the 13.6, and that will give us 15.6. And we always are going to round up, so 15.6 rounded up is 16 dwelling units. So to certify that whole project, we will need to test a minimum of 16 dwelling units in total. Remember, we can always do less than the sample group allows. So sample groups allowing 5, we can always have groups of smaller, 2, 3, 4. So we may do more dwelling units, but for this one, a minimum of 16 will get us to where we need to be. In our second example, we're going to do each building type that uses a different HERS measure. So now we can't group dwelling units between buildings. We have to only group dwelling units within a specific building type. So for this example, building type A is going to be 2 buildings of the project, so a total of 20 units in the project. Building type B is only going to be a single building, which will account for 10 units in the project. And building type C is 4 buildings, and it will be 40 units in the project. Now these all will have a single model within them. So as you see on the next slide, we'll get into subtracting those, but we only have one model per building type. We'll also be using the closed sampling method, so 1 and 7, and we will not be able to group, as I mentioned, between building types. So for this example here, we need to again subtract those model tests from each building type total. So building type A, 20 minus 1 is 19, type B, 10 minus 1 is 9, and type C, 40 minus 1 is 39. So we'll now need to take those, divide them by 7 because we are using the closed sampling method. 19 divided by 7 is 2.7, 9 divided by 7 is 1.2, and 39 divided by 7 is 5.5. Now we need to add back in our model test that we subtracted in step 1. So 2.7 becomes 3.7, 1.2 is now 2.2, and 5.5 becomes 6.5. And last, we need to round up. We always round up, even as you see we have 2.2. We cannot round down to 2. You always have to round up. So 3.7 becomes 4, 2.2 becomes 3, 6.5 becomes 7. We now need to add those together, and that will give us the minimum number of dwellings that we'll need to test. So 4 plus 3 plus 7 is going to be 14. So 14 is our minimum number that we'll need to achieve, or that we'll need to test in this project to meet the requirements.
This slide shows the process for pass failure protocols for HERS raters. So there are certain things that need to happen whether the home passes or fails. And this is the process that shows what those things need to happen. So the process starts with the installer. The installer is going to test 100% of their home. So whatever it is that they're installing, they're going to diagnose to make sure that everything they're installing is tested is installed to standard. And they're going to create the CF2R like we talked about earlier. The rater will then come in and test 100% of the models, which we talked about. And then they're going to choose a sampling size and sampling method. So 1 and 5, 1 and 7, open, closed method, doesn't matter. And they're going to test a random house in the sample group. So the rater, you randomly pick a house that you want to test and you test it. Nobody's going to tell you which house to test because it's up to you. Because it would be biased if the installer or the builder told you which house to test. If the first house passes, great. You certify the whole group. You create the CF3Rs for every single home in that group. You give them to the builder, and it's done. Okay. If the home fails, you have to report that failure in the registry. That means you have to actually go in there, enter the failure, and then test it again after they fix whatever that needs to be fixed. If the house fails again, plus one more house fails. So basically, once the first house fails, you have to retest it, plus you have to retest one more.
And basically that's to verify that the first failure wasn't just a fluke. So you test the first house, it fails. You test the second house along with retesting the one that originally failed, because obviously you have to fix it. If both houses pass, now again you're back on track and you certify the whole group. If the second house fails, at that point you have to test 100% of the homes in that particular group, which obviously is going to create delays, probably cost more money, and so forth. So keep that in mind. And keep in mind also that every failure that you encounter, you have to record them in the registry. You don't get the choice of just saying, well, they're just going to fix it on the spot and I'll retest it right away, so there is no need to record a failure. A failure is a failure. So if the house fails, you have to enter the failure in the registry. And this is just a summary of everything that I just said. So a HERS verification fails when it does not meet compliance with targets found in the CF1R. All failures have to be reported in the registry. If one house fails, the second house in the same group is tested. If the second house tested in the group fails, the rater has to conduct 100% testing in the group. And then the builder may elect to modify the CF1R and go through the permit application process to remove non-mandatory HERS verifications. So that's a specific scenario. So basically, let's say that you test something in a house and you just can't get it to pass for whatever reason. It wasn't built properly. The installer is just not doing a good job in installing whatever it is that the problem is. Therefore, the builder has the option of going back to the design stage and change the CF1R so that it meets whatever it is that's you're finding in the field. They're going to have to go through the permit application process again, but nonetheless they can do that. If they modify the CF1R and then it passes, that's fine as well, but nonetheless it's still a failure which you would still have to record. Sampling for additions and alteration works the same way as new construction, with the only exception that you only use the closed method. So if you remember when we talked about sampling in new construction, you have the 1 in 5 open method, 1 in 7 closed method. In additions and alterations, all you have is the 1 in 7 method. And there's also sub-requirements along with the sampling that we mentioned. So the main difference is the fact that no model testing is required. If you remember in new construction, you have to do model testing. In additions, alterations, you don't, because you don't really have models. You're working on custom homes, specific homes for alterations, for HVAC and so forth. So you're not going to have a model. Also, it's allowed when the following applies. All the homes in the group must have the same installing subcontractor, and then all the homes in the group must have the same associated HERS measures. The building owner may choose for the field verification and diagnostic testing to be completed for the dwelling unit individually, or alternatively as part of a designated sample group of dwelling units. That means that the homeowner, unlike new construction where there is no homeowner yet, for additions and alterations, the homeowner has the right to say, I want my house to be the tested house in the sample group, or I want my house to be part of the homes in the sample group. If the homes cannot meet sampling requirements, then the HERS rater will have to test 100% of the homes in the sampling group. And again, if you have any questions, contact us through the messaging system or give us a call.